All right, for more on this, we're joined by Operation Vulindlela's Mavuso Msimang. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. We've got two stories, one from the ISS. They are saying the visa regime keeps badly needed skills out of the country. In fact, here's how they're describing it. They're saying it's laborious, it's lengthy, it's inefficient. The process deters foreign investment, widens the skills gap, and throttles productivity and economic growth and development. Now, in May, we heard the presidency saying that the work of Vulindlela, Operation Vulindlela, is actually continuing and is doing well. Of the 35 priority areas which you're meant to accelerate and implement structural reforms, 11 out of them have been completed and only 14 are still on track. And on the area of visa regime, for example, they say there have been some fundamental changes there that are bringing about predictability, flexibility, and transparency. One, the trusted employer scheme, the streamlining application requirements, establishing a points-based system, and creating some new visa categories for remote workers and startups, all pointing to a system that is moving forward and that is improving. Now, you, of course, play an oversight and support role with the relevant department. The department is still ultimately responsible for implementation of the reforms. Are you surprised about this dichotomy in terms of what is actually happening at the department when it comes to visa regime?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Thabo, and good evening to your viewers. Yeah, this is a strange interview. I've done many, but this is quite the first one. First of all, I was retained and worked with a group of very competent people from the presidency, a lot of cooperation from the Department of Home Affairs, also from the Departments of Labor and Employment and Labor, I think it's called now, DTIC. And in our report, we indicate how grateful we are that there was so much cooperation. So to that point, we made recommendations, about 8 of them, subdivided and classifiable, by the way. I think it's important to say this, into those that required process changes, improving the processes, the efficiency of issuing a visa, removing the requirement to ask for documents that were totally unnecessary, such as a radiology certificate. Also, removing a need to ask for police reports for some people who may have changed 5 countries. How do you get police reports from each one of those and so on? These were accepted, and our report already contains the reaction of the Department of Home Affairs, where they were saying they accept the recommendations. Some of the things had been done by the time we finished our investigation or our report. Yes, let's call it an investigation. Some were done, those where most of the time, or some of the time, let me say, for process things like a radiology certificate, just to do trying to protect the country from TB carriers and so on. Well, what Home Affairs did was to make waivers already before changing the rules, the regulations. So their eagerness to accept the report was shown in them making waivers even before the regulations had been changed. We were extremely happy with their response to these things, and it worked very well. Really, I am not so sure what the basis of ISS has got its own sources of information. I really don't know them. I don't know Mr. Cilliers. I met him about in 2019, pre-COVID, something like that. So he would not really quite be fair to quote me as having said anything, because that was even before I undertook the study.
So he says in 2022, yourself, former Director General at Home Affairs, Mavuso Msimang, recommended that 22 requirements for skilled work permits be reduced to 8, with a lower compliance threshold and a 2-week time frame. Is that what you you said was in your recommendations, and there was a willingness to implement.
Absolutely, and a lot. I've kept a continuing interest in what's going on at Home Affairs. Because in some cases I had to provide some assistance, linking them with people in other departments, etc. I can tell you that there has been the recommendations that were made have been carried out to a very large extent. I listened to the figures. I don't have the detailed data on me that the minister was quoting. But yes, they have responded by complying with our requests. I'm a bit shocked. I don't know what ISS is talking about. I don't know what the experiences are. You see, there was a backlog before these recommendations were accepted. And they really needed to clear a backlog of very many years. COVID contributed to some of the stacking up of the backlog. But I was talking last week to an official from the American embassy who said, trying to assist somebody who wanted a visa to go to the United States. I know some people there. And he said, well, our backlog, I think they said, is something like 14 weeks. It's an amazing period of time. In fact, their backlog is higher than the Home Affairs one. So you just try and get a visa to go to the United States tomorrow. You will wait that long and so on. So, yes, if your question is, are they complying with this? They really are, and going out of the way, to the best of my experience, to ensure that the things that have not yet been approved, you need to change the law in certain instances. Right. But they've been engaging with a number of companies, talking to them some 4 months or so ago. Yeah. I was told that they've been meeting met more than 200 companies on issues of the trusted employee scheme. I think they've been proactive. That's been my experience, really. That's all I can say.
Still in conversation with Operation Vulindlela's Mavuso Msimang, and the question, of course, is around the structural reforms in the visa regime area following the ISS's complaint about the process being laborious, the process being inefficient, and citing a number of rejections, some 68% rejections on the business visa regime, and the minister saying, well, according to their numbers, they actually have 100% approval as far as that is concerned. But the big issue of Msimang has been around the question of critical skills. And now you're saying you've also had deliberations with the Department of Labor. What is your view on the list that they have compiled, the 140 occupations? Are they complete? Are they in any way lacking, or is there more that needs to be brought in there?
Critical skills change all the time. I think what was happening in the past was that the Department of Employment and Labor, which is responsible for drawing up this list, was not reviewing these. I think, I don't remember the year, but I think it would take 5 years or so to review and update the list. Well, the latest one, unless they've done something since I left, was done in 2022. And that upgrade was based also on the recommendations that update that were made. These things change all the time. And by the way, this list is developed at NADLAC. So it involves government, it involves the private sector, and it involves the Department of Labor. I cannot talk about how many people have applied in terms of this list and approved, but the update has considerably improved the ability to look to assist the companies to get the people they need. You see, there were improvements such as, how do I explain this? They might say, we have so many engineers, That was in the past, and so you probably don't need to bring in any engineers. I think the shortcoming of that list was that it didn't say what those engineers were doing, how many had retired. The thing then was the requirement was that this is updated to include skills that may not have been in there, that may have changed, etc. So I don't know. I finished about 6 months more ago this report. I did not particularly take a look at how that is functioning, but I do know that they have updated, which is a huge improvement from the time before we intervened and made these recommendations. You know, and there are certain skills which may not be in the list, for instance, you know, artificial intelligence people, IT, these things need to be included. And I think Home Affairs approves this, I know that for a fact, on a case-by-case basis, based on need. My impression was that really they've been responding very well and appreciating the need to facilitate the insourcing, the sourcing from outside of these skills. That's my impression.
How did you find the approval process? For example, had you still been working on this report and your recommendations, what would you have said, for example, to a complaint of this nature? One of the 22 critical skills visa requirements, right, is that an employer must prove that no citizen or permanent resident with the required qualifications, skills, and experience is domestically available. They are saying the high cost of just advertising that particular post and other requirements makes this particular exercise expensive.
So the current situation is that a person who is internal. Sorry, can you repeat that? What are they saying?
So if a company is for example, looking to hire somebody from outside with what they claim is a critical skill and that is not existent in the country, they would first need to advertise that particular post. That is a requirement according to them. And when you advertise that and then nobody takes up that particular post, that would be proof that there's no one in the country who exists with that particular skill, and only then would it be considered as one of those for the critical skills list. So they're saying that particular process just of advertising is expensive and would make this particular exercise out of reach.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. That's a matter, by the way, that needs to be discussed. That's dealt with at the Department of Employment and Labor. And Home Affairs would not be in a position to overrule that. But I'm still trying to understand that how you get somebody in without first making sure that the skill doesn't exist in the country. I don't know how long it takes to do that. You do need to do some of these things. How else do you know that the skill is not available unless people don't respond? But if the bureaucracy of doing that extends time inordinately, of course, that would need to be improved. I do know that wherever, honestly, that's my impression talking to the Home Affairs people since we published the report, where they have the ability to overrule some of the requirements without breaking the law, they do that in appreciation of the necessity to get the people in.
So the overall, I suppose, sentiment of the article and of the piece is that the Department of Home Affairs is undermining the President's effort to open up the investment space to get companies in. I mean, they even say there's a company from Germany that is selling its South African subsidiaries because they can't get their executives' permits to come on. So they're saying the Department of Home Affairs is deliberately undermining that President's effort. Now, you, of course, having been in the presidency and having worked with the department closely, would you say there is that attitude from the department to undermine the President's view of opening up the investment space and growing the economy?
That's a very, very strong statement. It wouldn't be supported by myself in terms of my experience, honestly, and it's a very strong statement. It actually would require that the president does something about that. What I've said, really, I don't look at the day-to-day things. So, and I have no doubt that people are experiencing difficulties. I'm saying the positive. There's been a very positive. I can and do call the DG Tommy, for instance, whenever somebody raises a query, completely informally, and say what's going on. He will investigate, and within 24 hours, a short time, he lets me know what was going on. And this is really, because I used to work there, I've developed friendships, acquaintanceships with the people there. It's not true that they are undermining the presidency. Absolutely not. They have to go through negotiating with other departments, which, and I don't want to say the Department of Labor is undermining anybody, but there are certain things that you cannot do unless the Department of Higher Education and Training also concurred. To suggest that there is an undermining, really, it doesn't fit into my experience. Absolutely not.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's correct. That is also highlighted here in this particular article. It says that in some instances, just by the rejection of the Department of Labor, then the Department of Home Affairs also reject the visas based on the negative recommendation of the Department of Labor. And you're saying there is no way around that. When the Department of Labor would not have approved that or gave a negative recommendation, the Department of Home Affairs has got to cooperate with that.
Yeah, all I can say really is that I am experiencing a very positive energy out of the department. I'll tell you, when we started, there's absolutely no doubt that a lot of the allegations that the ISS is making would have been true. There was a time when, I mean, it seemed the instinctive response to an application for a visa, a work visa, would be no, and so on. I can tell you, over the period during which we did the investigation, one saw, it was almost as if it's a relief for people in management that they are going to be able to indicate what the bottlenecks are and so on. And the report was accepted, by the way, by a minister who is highly critical of anything that's got to do with Home Affairs. And and I want to say that I have no doubt that people applying for visas, but we're talking about work visas. I don't want to broaden it because that's quite a different story. Or yeah, I will not stand here. I don't supervise Home Affairs and say none of what they say happens. I'm just saying I think we should give them some credit now that there's really been a very positive attitude to the recommendations.
Right.
I think also talking to the people in the presidency, I get the impression that they are happy with the department's efforts to implement these changes. There are some, I'm repeating what you know, really,
yes.
that you cannot change until legislation is in place.
Right.
But as I said, I have seen them do waivers, which they are allowed to do that until such time as the thing is, the requirement is removed from the regulation.
Mavuso, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on. Mavuso Msimang was there of Operation Vulindlela.